Most of the elements in a SharePoint installation are either defined using features or they leverage features in some way. And there's feature types that define most of the site elements with which you're already familiar. So the feature site template associations, they allow you to associate new features and functionality with existing site definitions or site templates, so that as you're provisioning a new site, features are automatically going to be included in provisioning, so they'll automatically be activated. Two features are involved in the feature site template association. The feature that contains the actual functionality that you want to add to an existing site template, and then the feature site template association feature itself. So that's usually declared at the farm or the web application level, which binds the first feature to the template. This is commonly referred to as feature stapling. What we're stapling is we're stapling a feature to an existing site template. And this helps facilitate versioning and reuse because we can actually change the functionality of the site template without having to change the site template itself. So the site template can remain independent and we can just add things on top of it as we need. You can also globally associate features with all site creation through all site definitions on the front-end web server. So if you want to associate a feature with the global site definition, you would just specify global #0 for the template name attribute, and that's the global template. So whenever you create a site, the global site definition is applied, so then your feature would also be applied. So that's a nice way to make sure that if you create a feature that you want every single site to have activated when they create your site, then you could staple that to the global site definition. There's also a workflow feature that allows you to attach custom workflows to SharePoint. The feature includes the code for the workflow and the forms needed at each step. And document converters are used if you want to automatically convert a document library item from one format to another. So for example, maybe if you wanted to convert a Word document to PDF, you could do something like that if you had a third-party converter, or if you have OpenXML format or something like that for your Office documents. So another type of feature are the site columns and content types. And these are probably some of the ones that you'll be, as developers, you'll be using these the most whenever you want to define your own types of data that you want to provision. So a field and site column are synonymous. Field is what you put in the XML in the schema for your feature, but in the UI of SharePoint, that correlates to the site column. And then content type that's a one-to-one. So the content type is going to match up with the content type in the UI. And then there's also content type binding. So what that lets you do is you can bind a specific content type to a list. So a good example of that would be, let's say you have a document library and you want to create a content type for proposals. So you could create a proposal content type, and then you could associate the proposal content type and associate it to a list. So essentially bind it to a list. And then you could, when you go into your list, you could actually associate a document with that content type. And so when users are in the, maybe they're in a certain document library, when they click on the new document or add a document, they might see, instead of just add document, add proposal. So that's some of the power of content type binding. And then there's the features for lists, so you can provision lists. So there's the concept of the list template. So list template would be like the context list. When we went to create a list, we used the contacts list template. A lot of times you probably would use or end users would use the custom list template through the UI. And then there's the list instance. So the list template, think of that as like it's like the schema of a database table, and then the instance is the actual instance of that template. So you may have a template called contacts, but then when we create a list off of that template and we call it prospects, prospects is that list instance. When you create a list through a feature, you can also define a receiver for that list. So different types of event receivers on the list. And then you can also, as you're provisioning lists, instead of not just provisioning the schema, but you can also provision some sample data in the list if you want. So the control feature, you might expect that to install controls, but it doesn't. Many of the core site pages use a web control called delegate control. And delegate control is a placeholder, so when the page renders, it loads a concrete control instance that's based on an ID and a sequence number. So delegate control looks for the lowest sequence number of a given ID, and then it loads the associated control. And the individual control features define the IDs and sequence numbers. So let's say, for example, we wanted to use the delegate control to basically like swap out maybe the top navigation menu. In SharePoint, in the master page, there's a delegate control that represents the top navigation, and let's say we created our own. We could swap out our own if we wanted to. So basically what the delegate controls allow you to do is to override existing controls in their own specialized instances on existing sites. So again, the power of this is kind of like feature stapling, where we don't want to modify the a global site template or the actual template the site was created on. We just want to add to it. So we leave it alone. The same thing with this control element here. If there's a delegate control, this will allow us to replace the ID of the control at runtime. So basically when this feature gets activated in a website, it's going to go through and find every instance of a control that has whatever ID we've identified here, and it's going to swap it out with whatever control that we've specified in this element. And that's a nice way of doing that at runtime we can add new functionality to the site without having to basically create a new master page or modify an existing master page. In module we already looked at, we just use the module to provision file. Modules are used to provision files. So we provision that sample.txt text file into the shared documents library using a module. And just as that control element allows you to insert controls into defined placeholders without changing the target site or pages, custom actions allow you to insert or hide links on pages and menus. So custom action and hide custom action both require that you specify a location, and then they affect the resulting page without directly altering its definition. So a custom action in SharePoint would be like when you're hovering over a list and you see the little drop-down box show up, and it gives you choices for, view item or delete item. Those are custom actions. So we can create our own custom actions, and they can also be applied not only on lists, but they can be targeted to the site setting pages. You can put them on create libraries, lists, and sites page. They enable greater control of additional navigation within the site than you can accomplish with the top level menus. So again, it's a nice way with, instead of having to create like a custom navigation item, maybe you have like an administrative form that you only want to show up in the site settings and only administrators can get the site settings. Well, instead of having to create your own special menu item for that and doing all the security trimming, you just use what's already built into SharePoint. You use a custom action, and your target will be the site settings page, and you can define in the custom action that only administrators are allowed to go to it, and you can deploy it, and you don't have to change any. You're not physically changing the page. You're just adding new functionality. Okay, so in this demo, what we're going to do is we're going to look at building a custom action feature. And so in this case, it's going to be a custom action that is going to show up on the site settings page. So I have some files made already, and I'm going to browse to them. So let's go to my feature file. So this is going to be a scoped at the site collection, and the title of this feature is going to be Custom Action Demo. And the really interesting part of this is the elements file, and this is where we're going to be using the custom action element. And so here's our custom action element, and we're giving it a location. So we could give it, there's other locations we can use, obviously. So if we want it to be a menu item on a list, for example, like the title, the drop down that shows up under a title, like the link title field, we could specify a different location to send it there. But this is specifying it to show up on the site settings page. This is the description that's going to show up for it. This is the title that you're going to see, and it's going to fall under the site collection admin group. And then we're giving it a URL action, so we're just going to give it any URL. But this is a nice, easy way that you can add on a way to customize SharePoint, building on leveraging the architecture that's already there to add your own types of navigation to SharePoint. Kind of blend in with the rest of the SharePoint architecture. So what I'm going to do now is we go ahead and open up PowerShell. And first of all, what I need to do is we need to create a folder in the 15 Hive. So I'm going to create a folder under Features. And we'll call it Custom Action Demo. And we'll need to place these two files in here. Okay. So we'll go ahead and install that feature, and it's installed. Now we'll go to our site. Let's go to our site settings page, site collection features, and here's our custom action demo feature, so we'll activate that. So now we've activated that, so now we should see a link in our site settings page under the site collection administration. So let's go to site settings. This is the site collection information that we specified it we wanted our link to be under. And at the very bottom, here's our link. And you can see our description right there. This is a demo custom action. So if I click on it, it's going to go to the link that we specified in the action URL. And there it is.